My cousin sent me a baby shower registry with $7,200 worth of gifts, then said, "Don't bother coming if you can't afford." Real family support. My aunt laughed. "She's carrying the next generation. Show some respect." I stayed quiet. That night, I pulled my funding from the venue, and what happened next sent the whole family into chaos. I, 32M, pulled my funding from my cousin's baby shower after she demanded $7,200 in gifts. The registry notification lit up my phone at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was finishing up some work emails when I saw it, a baby shower invitation from my cousin, complete with a link to her registry. Curious, I clicked through. The total at the bottom made me blink twice. $7,200. For a baby shower. I scrolled through the list. A designer crib for $1,800. A gold-plated baby monitor system for $900. Organic cotton onesies at $45 each. A nursing chair that cost more than my first car. I sat there in the glow of my laptop screen, wondering if this was some kind of joke. The text message came through 30 seconds later. She told me she was so excited I'd received the invitation, and that she really hoped I could contribute something meaningful. Then came the part that made my jaw tighten. She said not to bother coming if I couldn't afford to show real support, and that this was about family stepping up when it mattered. I stared at those words for a long time. Real support. Real family. The thing about family is that everyone has a different definition of what it means. For my cousin, apparently it meant a price tag. For me, it had always meant something else entirely. I didn't respond that night. I set my phone down and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept circling back to that message, to the casual dismissal embedded in those words. The assumption that my value as family could be measured in designer baby gear. What my cousin didn't know, what most of my family didn't know, was that I'd already been involved in her baby shower planning for weeks. Her mother, my aunt, had called me a month earlier asking for help. The venue she wanted was way outside their budget. It was this beautiful garden estate with a pavilion overlooking a lake, the kind of place that books up a year in advance. She'd been devastated when she called to reserve it and heard the price. That's when my aunt reached out to me. She knew I'd done well for myself. I'd started a tech consulting business 5 years ago that had grown beyond my expectations. I lived modestly, drove a reasonable car, didn't flaunt anything. But I had resources, and my aunt knew it. She asked if I could help with the venue. Not pay for all of it, she'd said, just help bridge the gap. She told me how much it would mean to my cousin, how this was her first child, how she deserved something special. I'd agreed without hesitation. Family helps family. That's what I'd always believed. I'd written a check for $4,500. The venue was secured. My aunt had been so grateful she'd almost cried on the phone. She made me promise not to tell my cousin. She wanted it to be a surprise. Wanted my cousin to just enjoy her day without worrying about costs. So I'd kept quiet. And now, 2 weeks later, I was being told not to come unless I could afford to show real support. The next message came the following morning. My aunt this time. She'd clearly heard that I'd received the registry and wanted to follow up. She told me that my cousin was carrying the next generation of our family, that this was a big deal, and that I needed to show some respect. She said successful people like me had a responsibility to lift up the family, especially at important times like this. I read that message 3 times. Each time, I felt something cold settle deeper in my chest. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more final than that. I called the venue that afternoon. Spoke to the events coordinator I'd been working with. Asked what the cancellation policy looked like for my portion of the payment. She was surprised. Everything was all set, she told me. The deposit was non-refundable, but if I wanted to cancel my additional contribution, they could adjust the booking. However, that would change the package significantly. The family would need to either pay the difference or downgrade to a much simpler setup. I told her I understood. Then I told her to send the refund paperwork. She asked if everything was all right. I said it was fine, just a change in circumstances. She processed it professionally, said the family would be contacted about the balance due. I hung up and sat in my home office for a while, looking out the window at nothing in particular. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry anymore either. Mostly I felt tired. The call came 2 days later. My aunt, her voice sharp with panic. She asked what the hell I'd done, why the venue was suddenly saying they needed another $4,500 or the booking would be canceled. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I told her I'd received my cousin's message about not coming if I couldn't afford to show real support. I said I'd taken that advice to heart and decided not to attend. Since I wouldn't be there, it didn't make sense for me to fund a venue for an event I wasn't welcome at. She tried to backtrack immediately, said I'd misunderstood, that my cousin didn't mean it like that, that of course I was welcome. I asked her if she'd seen the registry total. She went quiet. Then she said that young parents needed help getting started, that it was normal to ask family for support. I agreed that asking for help was normal. Demanding $7,000 in gifts and then telling people not to come if they couldn't afford it was something else entirely. I told her I'd been happy to help with the venue when it was about family coming together. But I wasn't interested in being treated like an ATM with a minimum withdrawal requirement. She got angry then, told me I was being petty, that I was punishing a pregnant woman over a misunderstanding, that everyone knew I had money and could afford to be generous. She said family was supposed to sacrifice for each other. I asked her if she thought $4,500 wasn't a sacrifice, if she thought that didn't count because I hadn't made a big show of it. The line went very quiet. Then I told her the truth, that I'd been the one funding the venue all along, that I'd done it quietly because I wanted to help, not because I wanted recognition, and that her daughter's message had made it very clear how my contribution was valued. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller. She tried to apologize, but it came out defensive. She said she didn't know, that if she'd known she would have talked to my cousin, that this was all a misunderstanding. I told her it probably was. But the misunderstanding was thinking that family meant showing up with a checkbook and not asking questions. I ended the call before it could go further. Update 1. The family group chat exploded that evening. I'd muted it months ago, but my brother called to tell me I needed to look at what was happening. My cousin had posted a long message about how she was being abandoned by family during the most important time of her life. How people were backing out of commitments and ruining her baby shower. How she never expected such selfishness from people she'd grown up with. She didn't mention me by name, but several relatives chimed in asking who would cancel on a pregnant woman. My aunt added a comment about how some people valued money more than family bonds. My brother asked what I wanted to do. I told him nothing. I wasn't going to defend myself in a group chat or air out the details of who paid for what. The people who needed to know the truth already knew it. He said that was probably smart, but I should know that not everyone was buying the narrative. My uncle, my aunt's ex-husband, had apparently heard what happened and was furious. He'd tried to call my aunt, and she wouldn't answer. He'd reached out to my brother asking for my side of things. I told my brother he could share whatever he wanted. I had nothing to hide. The next day, my uncle posted in the group chat. He kept it simple. Said he'd heard there was confusion about the shower planning, and that before everyone rushed to judgment, they should know that I'd quietly funded the entire venue rental as a gift. He said that I'd done it without asking for recognition, and that maybe people should think about that before throwing accusations around. The chat went silent for about an hour. Then the private messages started coming to me. Some were apologetic. A few cousins who'd liked my cousin's post reached out saying they didn't know the full story. One of my aunts called to say she'd always known I was generous and that my cousin had been out of line. But others doubled down. My cousin sent me a message saying that if I'd really wanted to help, I wouldn't have pulled out over a misunderstanding. That pregnant women were hormonal and I should have been the bigger person. That I'd humiliated her in front of the whole family. I didn't respond to that one. My aunt sent something similar. She said I'd made my point and now I was just being cruel. That they couldn't afford to cover the venue difference and the shower would have to be moved to her backyard. That my cousin was crying every day about how her special moment was ruined. I felt a flicker of something when I read that. Not quite guilt. More like the ghost of who I used to be. The version of me that would have apologized and fixed everything just to keep the peace. But that version of me had written a $4,500 check and been told not to bother showing up unless I could do more. I put my phone away and went back to work. Update 2. The shower happened 3 weeks later in my aunt's backyard. I heard about it through my brother, who went because his wife felt obligated. He said it was tense. About half the people who'd originally RSVP'd didn't show. The ones who came seemed divided between people sympathizing with my cousin and people who thought the whole thing had been handled badly. My cousin apparently made several comments throughout the day about family disappointment and how she was learning who she could really count on. My brother said his wife almost walked out twice. The registry drama had continued online. My cousin had adjusted it after everything blew up. removing the most expensive items and adding a note about how she understood times were hard and any contribution was appreciated. But the damage was done. According to my brother, she'd received maybe $2,000 worth of gifts total, mostly from her friends rather than family. I felt oddly nothing about all of it. I'd expected to feel vindicated or guilty or something strong. Instead, it just felt sad and wasteful. What I didn't expect was the call I got 2 weeks after the shower. It wasn't from my cousin or my aunt. It was from my grandfather. He was 91 and didn't involve himself in family drama usually. But he'd heard the whole story from multiple sources and wanted to talk to me directly. He asked me to come visit him. I drove out that Saturday. He lived in a small house he'd built himself 40 years ago, refusing to downsize or move even after my grandmother passed. We sat on his porch with coffee, and for a while he didn't say anything about the situation. We just talked about his garden and my work and the weather. Then he asked me what I'd learned from all this. I thought about it. Told him I'd learned that being quiet about generosity sometimes meant being invisible, that people valued what they could see, and if they couldn't see your contribution, it didn't count. He shook his head, said that wasn't quite it. He told me that I'd learned something more important, that I couldn't control how people valued me, only how I valued myself. That the moment I'd pulled that funding wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about recognizing my own worth. He said he'd spent his whole life helping family. Sometimes it was appreciated, sometimes it wasn't. But the times he regretted weren't the times he'd helped and been taken for granted. They were the times he'd helped when he knew he was being used, when he'd ignored that feeling in his gut that told him something was wrong. He told me I'd done the right thing, not because my cousin didn't deserve help, but because I'd recognized when help had become exploitation, when family had become transaction. We sat there for a long time after that. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. Update 3. The final piece came 2 months later. My cousin had her baby, a healthy girl. The family chat filled with photos and congratulations. I added a simple congratulations message and left it at that. 3 weeks after the birth, my cousin requested to video call me. I almost declined, but curiosity won out. She looked exhausted when her face appeared on screen. The baby was crying in the background. She asked if I had a few minutes. I said yes. What came next surprised me. She apologized. Really apologized, not the defensive kind from before. She said that becoming a mother had given her perspective she didn't have before. That she'd been so focused on creating this perfect moment that she'd lost sight of what actually mattered. She told me she'd talked to her mother about everything. That she'd learned I was the one who'd funded the venue all along. And that her message to me had been what triggered everything falling apart. She said she'd been stressed and overwhelmed and had taken it out on the people trying to help her. She didn't ask me for anything. Didn't try to rebuild what was broken. Just said she was sorry and that she understood if I couldn't forgive her. I told her I appreciated the apology, that I didn't need to hold on to anger about it, but I also couldn't go back to how things were before, that some boundaries, once established, needed to stay in place. She nodded, said she understood. Then she thanked me for what I'd done for the venue originally, even though it hadn't worked out. Said she knew I'd been trying to do something kind. We ended the call shortly after. It wasn't a full reconciliation. We weren't going to be close again, probably ever. But it was something. An acknowledgement. A closing of the loop. My aunt never apologized directly, but she stopped making comments in the family chat about loyalty and sacrifice. When I saw her at a family gathering a few months later, she was polite but distant. We both seemed to understand that something fundamental had shifted. The wider family eventually moved on, the way families do. New dramas emerged. Other conflicts. The baby shower incident became old news, though I noticed people were more careful around me now. More aware that quiet didn't mean pushover. I continued helping family when I could, but I did it differently. I checked in with myself first, made sure I was giving freely rather than from obligation or guilt. Said no more often. Set clearer boundaries about what I would and wouldn't do. My grandfather called it growing up. I called it surviving. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Family is complicated. Love is complicated. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who think they're entitled to your sacrifice. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone, including yourself, is to step back and let them figure out that you're not a resource to be managed. You're a person, with limits, with worth, with the right to decide when generosity becomes self-erasure. I'd pulled my funding from that venue not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to remember that. And in the chaos that followed, somewhere between the anger and the accusations and the eventual quiet, I'd found something I hadn't expected. I'd found respect. Not from everyone in my family. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. But from myself. And that, it turned out, was worth more than any venue, any registry, any performance of family unity could ever be. The baby is almost 1 now. I sent a gift for her birthday. Nothing extravagant. Just something thoughtful and appropriate. My cousin sent a thank you text. We're not close. We probably never will be again. But I sleep better now. And when I help family these days, I do it because I want to, not because I'm afraid of being seen as selfish if I don't. That's worth everything.